Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back at last to Other Minds and Hands after a long hiatus. Maggie and I have returned from the land of Rings and Realms. It's funny, of course. This is one of I've a bunch of things have been on hiatus during Rings and Realms season here over the last couple months. But this feels like the strangest sort of hiatus on account of, it's
This is what we're talking about.
yeah, exactly. We're back to, talking with you guys about the stuff that we've been talking about. And of course, Maggie and I have been, it's strange to say we've been apart because of course, Maggie and I have been together. We've been she's been here in New Hampshire and we've been physically at the studio together many days and many long hours. So
Many long stretches. Yeah, it's been very surreal, but it's also been amazing because it was the stuff that we were really missing the last time, like season one.
yeah.
There was so much more, I feel like, crossover of your bit and my bit and working together and figuring things out and talking with Ben, and it was awesome. So I was so glad I was able to be there for it.
Yeah. No, it
It was
was.
intense, and I was always the first to leave at like 1 or 2 in the morning. You guys carried on to like 4, but
Yes.
but we've
Yes.
missed this. We did talk quite a bit about Other Minds and Hands and just, the kinds of conversations we were having off camera were the kinds of things that we would have probably figured out here or talked through a little bit here, or thought about here. So it was nice to do that live, but we missed all of you.
Yeah, and the application for me, especially of so many of the things that we have discussed and talked about. I am frequently sort of put in mind of all of the things that we have, you know, all of the stuff that I have learned and the patterns of thought that we have been developing through all of our conversations and things. It's it was very striking. There were a lot of things, a lot of moments during the analysis of season two, and especially during discussions of season two. During and after, where I've been mindful of a bunch of the things that we've talked about here.
Yeah, your visual analysis game was on point for most of those scene readings. It
Getting
was it was
better.
fun, and I don't mean this at all patronizing. It was really fun to like do it with somebody else, and you were like, "Ooh, what does that light mean?" And look at the light there, and it was really fun to like figure
Yeah.
that out. And then I would take a back seat while he and Ben went off on how a map was formed and how on earth could this possibly be correct. And the Baradons can't be there; they need to be here. And
Oh my
it was
goodness.
great.
That map. I still just want to beat my head against that map or someone else's. But yeah, no. No, it's been really cool. It's been again. I feel like I've learned so much. Um, uh, have learned so much from this whole process. Any thoughts
Same.
that you guys? I mean, so one thing that we wanted to do was just kind of sort of debrief a little bit. We haven't had a chance to talk with you guys much about season two of the Rings of Power, about stuff that we've been discussing on Rings and Realms. Would be happy to kind of touch on any of those things. First of all, let me give a little update as far as what's going on with Rings and Realms. So you will notice, many people will have noticed, that of course episode 8 of Rings and Realms still has not dropped. The reason Rings and Realms episode 8 hasn't dropped is because it was postponed. We couldn't do post-production on episode 8 because the whole production team was shooting. Like, we shot, holy cow, between Tuesday and Saturday of the week after, like the second week of October, the week after episode 8 dropped. Tuesday and Saturday of that week, we must have captured 20
We
hours
we counted.
minimum.
It was about 26 hours.
26 hours. Yeah.
It was about 26 hours of content
Yeah.
in that time.
Yeah.
And they were telling us because we were like, "Can you tell us how many hours?" And they're like, "We can tell you how many terabytes."
Yes.
I was like, "Oh no. How many drives did we fill?"
Exactly.
And everybody that was shooting and working on the retrospective with us are our editors. So
Yes.
it's not like they could work on anything, and we all we did was give them more
Yeah,
work.
yeah, we had it creates a particular kind of problem when you don't give your post-production team, like your editing team, time to edit because they're shooting new footage instead. So it's a kind of a compounding problem. Yeah.
And we had the Ben Walker interview that was pretty much edited. So that was about ready to come out. So that has come out, as I'm sure you guys have seen. But we also have the showrunners interview.
Yeah.
So that was an extra hour of
We did
content that's coming.
Yeah, we did a long
Corey
interview with JD and Patrick, which was a really, really fun discussion.
is a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
And then we each did like one-on-ones with some of the retrospective folks. So there's just like a ton of stuff that Ben sent us a perspective.
And then the
sketch.
retrospective day itself, where we filmed another like 10 to 12 hours of material there. So yeah, there's a lot. There's so much. So that's why we came to the end of that week, and then of course not only did we come to the end of that week, and we now had like literally dozens of hours of footage that needed to be edited and processed in order to put out. Also, everyone was exhausted and hadn't slept in days. So
We were just comparing notes, like, so what did you do that first Monday? How many hours did you sleep that first Monday?
man.
Oh,
Monday, yeah,
so
the
day
holiday,
after the retrospective ended, yeah.
that was oh man, like 14 hours of sleep at least.
yeah,
But
basically, Druid's Fire, yeah, you can clear your calendars. There's going to be a lot of content between now and Christmas.
so it's the plan right now is to release about 1 to 2 episodes a week, essentially, from here on out. Episode 8 is going to be in 2 parts because it would be like 4 hours long. There's a lot for episode 8. So we're gonna release episode 8 in 2 parts. We're gonna release the retrospective. Like just the retrospective stuff is going to be 7 episodes. Like 7 hour-and-a-half to 2 hour episodes. We're not talking about little tiny segments. We're talking full multi-hour episodes, 7 of them.
And you guys will appreciate this. For every episode of the retrospective, our goal was 45 to 60 minutes per topic.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one went over. Oh no, I think one of them was 58.
Well, we were fine. We never went past like an hour 10 or so. Like it was.
And like you'll notice, I didn't shut much down. I have no problem with this. There was only one I started shutting down because I could see our camera guy going, which usually means the card is
They're
full.
running out of space on the memory card. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole lot that's good. So the reward for patience here in these first couple weeks after the season finale dropped, the show season finale dropped, is there's going to be a great deal more content coming. And we're still, by the way, I'm still in communication with several of the cast setting up interviews. There's a bunch of other people we still are hoping and planning to have conversations with, which may continue over the course of the next few months.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be.
And I do
cool.
think that's a nice difference of us too, that like we don't need to get it for the episode drop. We're quite happy to have conversations with these guys anytime. So I think they appreciate that too, that they don't, I mean, the ones we've had so far, they were pretty thrilled they didn't have to get everything done in 15 minutes. And they asked us if they could talk longer with us. We're like, yup.
Yeah.
I can.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's for those of you who've seen the Ben Walker interview, I mean, his reaction where he was like, most of the time I get asked questions that are like a 30-second, response, being able to kind of dig into talking about these larger themes and, character development questions and book questions and world building questions are the kind of thing that, many of the cast really just love discussing. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to be continuing to release several more. So there may indeed be Rings of Power, Rings and Realms content coming out through into December. So that'll be that'll definitely be a lot of fun. Yeah. So the end was intense. Oh, by the way, didn't help that this all began right as I came home from Germany. So it was like the morning after we got home from Germany that we started off recording.
And there was that crazy storm that the whole studio lost power that morning.
Yes.
So as we were coming in, all the tech guys were like, hey, so we didn't have power like 3 hours ago. We might need to go get more diesel for our backup generator.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was an adventure, but the actual weekend was just amazing. So
Yeah.
I hope you guys will be thrilled with the content that came out of it. But gathering that many people together to look at something that we all care about and just talk about it and think about it and share with each other, and your sister-in-law making the most incredible catering spread of a Hobbit feast I've ever seen, like way better than the red carpet tours. I mean, dare I say it. It was amazing. So
yeah, it was fun. We had yes, my sister-in-law Kim, who did a marvelous job, and she had the idea for that came. We had hosted a Lord of the Rings movie marathon at the studio, and it was the inspiration of that was celebrating my nephew's 16th birthday. My nephew, who is the biggest Tolkien fan in that generation in my family. And Ben had always said, he's like, I've always wanted to do a Lord of the Rings movie marathon at the studio. So we were like, let's do it, right? So we did it on the big screen, and so for that day, Kim did like 6 meals, like we did the full like Hobbit meals at every intermission and stuff. And so this was in June. So at that point, we had just been deciding to do the retrospective. Like it was a thing. So Ben and I afterwards were like, we should do this again. Like this was perfect. Let's do that.
And it
again.
was, I mean, I'm just going to gush about the food for a minute. It wasn't just like a lot of lovely food. It was like individual handmade recipes I need type things. Like 10 of those per sitting, and there were 4 sittings.
Yeah.
Like it was amazing.
She has she has a gift.
Yeah, and like the table decorations, and she was in costume. She made us a banner. It was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the people that came too. It was just such a warm, lovely, thoughtful weekend. So we hope you guys can see that in what we put out, but know that it was.
And we should mention, for people who don't know, the guests that we had who joined us for discussions that day. It was me and Maggie, and then we had Matt from Nerd of the Rings, and we had Alan Sisto from the Prancing Pony, and we had Kirsten Cairns from the OneRing.net, Green Dragon at the OneRing.net, and then we had James Tauber from the Digital Tolkien Project. So the 4 of them came up, and the 6 of us were involved in discussions, in different discussions throughout both days. Again, lots and lots of really interesting discussions.
And during the downtime, they all recorded fan tracks for Collaboratory.
Yes.
So you'll be able to listen to James and Alan talk through an episode, or
yes,
that should be fun. I can't wait to listen to those.
Yeah, I think Matt and Alan did one together too, and
I think Alan did like 6. So
Alan was into it. Alan loved doing
Yeah.
the audio commentaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, no, that's that'll be a lot of fun. So anyway, so lots of really great stuff. I wanted to say we were going to talk about this too, but Patrick on YouTube was asking about this. Will Rings and Realms have War of the Rohirrim content as well? Yes, we will. We're planning on that. There's a lot that we don't know yet. We're still in the early stages of kind of figuring that out, how that's going to work. But yeah. So we're,
it's definitely not something we want to ignore for a lot of reasons. Like, obviously, we want to talk about it here because it's such a neat adaptation, but we think it's definitely the kind of thing that's ripe for the analysis that we've been doing. And I think getting a lot sharper on. So the fact that we can bring this kind of like critical analysis, like the metaphor that Corey kept using that I absolutely love is like art critics looking at a piece of art. We're bringing that to it. So we'll tell you about brushstrokes and light and things like that. And to bring that kind of analysis into an anime just feels like so much fun. So Yeah, it'd be really hard to not do something with War of the Rohirrim.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we're still, again, we're working on plans and exactly how this would work. Even questions like, are we gonna like run another little Kickstarter for that? We don't know. We're not sure.
We'll know in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah,
But
yeah, we're in the midst of actively figuring that out. Another thing that we're thinking about is the possibility. Thinking about timing. We might, if we. Well, I think we will do War of the Rohirrim, but when we do the War of the Rohirrim stuff, we're talking about possibly waiting to release it until like in January, or like basically when it's released on streaming services, not when it's not at the theatrical release. I think that might work out a little bit better. It'll be easier for people to like queue it up and rewatch it, in conjunction with the stuff that we're doing. So yeah.
and it would just be nice to put something out that we haven't that we'll actually have read through our script before we film it. So to not have to just
Yeah.
write it and say it, to actually have a week or two to think about it would be delightful.
There is something deeply attractive to in the idea of being able to actually have time.
Pre-production? What?
We had more pre-production this year than we had
totally.
last time. For
Totally.
sure, but there still wasn't time. I mean, that's as Maggie said. So the biggest difference by far between season 1 and season 2 of Rings and Realms is that season 2 was scripted. Like I wrote full scripts, and whereas season 1 I was winging it. I was working off of an outline, but I was basically winging it. And that was such an
Which in
improvement.
one way is like way more impressive that you can just wing it, but
Well,
it was a lot more efficient.
it was
to
much
have a
more
script.
efficient. It was much more efficient. Anyway, so that was really delightful rather, to be able to write the scripts and everything. But as Maggie said, time was so stretched, and script writing, it was a lot of script. For my own segments, I was writing about 10 to 12,000 words per episode, at least, sometimes more.
And yes, we might see if there's a way we can publish those notes. We'll see.
Yeah, it's actually something that we're thinking about. Yeah, I was casually saying like, so actually my Rings and Realms scripts put together are actually like, I wrote more words. They're longer than my Hobbit book, actually, like all put together. And then as soon as I said that out loud, we were like,
Aw,
maybe. I'm like, I
maybe
basically
we
wrote a
should do
book on
something.
season 2 of the Rings of Power, for this. I said, well, maybe that could be repackaged actually in some interesting ways. But anyhow, so that was great. But again, as Maggie said, rare were the times when I had time both to write the script and also read it through before I actually was reading it in front of the camera.
Did you ever get to read it through? I don't think I did.
I think once or twice, but not very many times.
I think there were a couple times I read it through in front of the camera, like it was
Right.
scrolling while they were still setting stuff up.
Yeah,
And that was probably about it.
Yeah, exactly. It was, yeah, it was tricky. There were a bunch of times I said it was much more efficient than when I was winging it. But there were certainly times when I'd be standing there in front of the camera and I would be like in mid flow, and then I would just come and I'd be like, and there's no verb in that sentence. That is not a sentence. Hang on. I gotta redo that.
I had a whole section where I referred to a seal door and it was a Lendale through the entire thing.
Right.
It was 2 a.m. people.
The kinds of things that one normally catches on a reread and a little editing pass, but
I finished it and Ben was like,
Right. Ben, of course, this is one of the things that Ben does a lot. And actually those are the moments always, like
director.
we'd come to the end of a take and Ben would be like, so, and I'm like, uh-oh, here it comes.
That is also when you are so grateful that your director and the creator like understands the content.
Yes, exactly. So there were times when he would point out, like, actually, like, you made a mistake or you overlooked something. And again, like, golly, would that have been good to catch before I stood in front of the camera and said it, right? Instead of afterwards. But again, really, really useful to to have all that. So, I mean, this is just, it's the nature of trying to do these during the season. I mean, I did get the episodes a couple days early, so it was better than before. I was able to start a little bit earlier, but man, it was still not much. And then, of course, in the middle of that, I was still traveling. I did 3 moots during the 6-week span of the show. I was in Seattle on opening weekend. I was in Cincinnati 2 weeks later, and I was in Germany on the weekend of the finale. So,
Yeah, and that's the other reason episode 8's delayed because you were in Germany, I was in Los Angeles. Like we had 8 days where we weren't in the studio.
Yeah.
Like that didn't happen before that week.
Yeah. We never even had the opportunity to start shooting episode 8 until that Tuesday afterwards. Yep. So it would have been cramped even if we didn't have anything else going on. And of course we had the whole retrospective going on. So yeah, it was complicated. It was a lot.
In short, though, we think you're gonna like it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and
yeah.
So coming back to War of the Rohirrim, the idea of being able to watch a film in the theater, possibly multiple times, take notes, think it through, write scripts, revise them, and then actually shoot something like a month later, that's just an inconceivable amount of prep time.
And just thinking about like the time that Studio Lab would have to create the virtual backgrounds, to create detail, to create additional shots, like similar to us writing scripts, there were days that it's like, well, which environment's ready? Which one can we shoot next? Because I have the script for this, but you don't have the background for that. So it's going to be pretty amazing to just have a little bit more time.
Yeah, I'm still holding out hope, Maggie, that the Studio Lab people can turn us into anime characters. Did you see what they were? Not for the whole thing, but for at least part of a segment.
They can. I mean, did you see what they were doing with my daughter and Spider-Man?
And Spider-Man, yes.
They had this camera that was using AI to use every image of Spider-Man they could find online and match her body. So this is a 3-year-old, as she's running around like a crazy person, she was 70 different kinds of Spider-Man. It was amazing.
Which she loved. Like every time Hazel was in the studio, she was like, "Can I go be Spider-Man now?"
Where's my Spider-Man camera? That's the only reason I'm here.
Yeah, the magic Spider-Man cam. Yeah, exactly.
That felt like an afterthought to them. I'm like, oh, they can make us anime.
Yeah, exactly. So that's I have a little hope that we could be turned into anime characters. We'll see. But anyway, yeah, we'll but as you say, there'll be much more time for us to work on what we can do and see what we can sort out for the War of the Rohirrim. We'll have more updates as we make more definite plans about what's going on.
Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We see there's people trickling in because the announcements didn't go out, but we've missed you. So It's nice to see you all here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so first of all, does anybody are there any sort of questions or discussion points that you would have from Rings of Power season 2? Like while we're still thinking about it, obviously we've talked about a lot through Rings and Realms and stuff. But anyway, yeah. We
thought there might be something a little bit more specific to you guys that might be of interest.
Yeah. One of the things that I was so Phil, much on Gandalf to come in episode 8. Like I'm talking about it a great deal in episode 8. So I'll hang out on that because we've There's a bunch in the can already about that. Mrs. Manrake says, do we have new analysis for season 1 after seeing season 2? That's a really good general question. It's something we've thought about a little bit. There were several things that now I want to make sure I have concrete examples. But there were several things that I was uncertain about or unclear about in season 1 that I felt much better about after season 2. Certainly, this was something that I expected, but it was something I was kind of granting them on faith at the end, was the way that episode 8, Halbrand's involvement with Celebrimbor in episode 8 of season 1. And a lot of people, of course, got upset about it because they were like, is that all we're going to get? Like one line from Halbrand, to Celebrimbor, call it a gift. And that's the entire Anatar story. Right. And you guys will remember that I was saying all the way through, like, no, I think we're going to get more. I don't think that's the whole Anatar story. But certainly seeing in season 2 what they were setting up in episode 8 of season 1 helped me to understand that better. So anyway, that was, that was one example. And I felt that there were other things like that. It is, again, it's related to some of the stuff that we've been saying all along. The show, they were explicit from the beginning that they're playing the long game, right?
Yep.
And it's one of the intrinsic challenges. All the way along, I have felt that one of the biggest issues that the Rings of Power was facing is that from the start, they were asking for more patience and goodwill and buy-in than people were willing to give them. And when you didn't, if you were unwilling to buy in, if you were unwilling to be patient, if you were unwilling to roll with things and see how things developed, and, different people have different reasons for feeling that way, for being resistant in that way. But if you're unwilling to, then many, many things in season 1 fell flat, which you can see if you continue in patience on through. You can say, okay, now I see what was being set up there, where this is headed. The stuff with the rings, I thought I really love. And this is a conversation we had in several places with our friends in the retrospective. I really like the change to the ring order. I thought that the way that they did it in poem order created a really interesting narrative that brings some fascinating things to the surface. And that was really one of my favorite moments in the retrospective. I've been wanting to have an in-depth discussion with Matt, Nerd of the Rings, about the ring order thing, because it's always really bothered him, and I understand why it bothers him. But I'd wanted to have that discussion with him for a long time, and I finally got to have it during one of those discussions.
And that's the conversation that we almost ran out of memory on the card, and we had 3 minutes left, and we went to like 1:16, and I saw Blake being like,
Yeah. But we did it. We
didn't cut anybody off, but we made sure people knew they had to wrap up.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that was really fun. So there were several things like that, which I do feel really have grown. Many things also, like Galadriel's character development, which is a 5-season arc, right? Where there were definitely things that moved forward significantly in season 2. Whereas a lot of people were frustrated, like, why is Galadriel's character the way that it was in season 1? Because it was the beginning of a long arc. And if you're not willing to be patient, if so many people were like, that's not Galadriel, and I'm like, well, no, that's not Galadriel yet, right?
But like
their
but
whole
we
point.
also understood that, you know,
Right.
like it is just a huge ask. So we were having the same frustrations of like, oh, it's so hard to watch this character because it's just not giving us a lot. And season two, we kind of started to see that real arc. So if, you know, we talked about the end of season one where we were, if you compare it to the trilogy, they were only as far as the prancing pony. Like that's as far they'd gotten
Right.
to debris.
Right.
Like that's where
Yep.
we were. So, you know, giving it some context like that, it was like, okay, take a deep breath. So it was nice going into this one to be like, oh, I can see now where we are. So if this is what we're working with, we're only here.
Yeah.
So it
We're now
makes more sense in that
40%, which
trajectory.
is,
We're 40%, almost
but
halfway.
still less than halfway.
Yeah, but still less than halfway.
Yeah.
But again, like I get that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Playing the big picture, I see what they're doing, I see where we're going, but that doesn't mean it's not easy. Wait, that doesn't mean it's easy. That
Yes.
means it's hard.
Yes.
Yeah, it's still tricky.
It's still tricky. And you know, and this is, yeah, it is. It's also part of the nature of this kind of show. By this kind of show, I mean a sequential, a sequential, you know, long running series, but a highly produced long running series, right? Where they not only, you know, have to do it in discrete chunks, but there's a fair amount of time between the chunks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I have no idea. Don't ask me because I have no idea when season 3 is going to come out. I've heard nothing and know nothing. This is the kind of
They
information
haven't
that
even
they
officially greenlit
guard
it yet.
like it's,
Yeah.
you know, nuclear launch codes or something. So I have no idea. Sorry, that's me being snarky and annoyed because I always feel like
Why is it such a big secret?
yes,
Yeah.
why is it such a big why this is the number of times I have uttered the question, why is it such a big secret about something Prime Video related? It's been a lot of times. But
We're like,
anyway, yeah.
I have a question here that I can answer quickly. So
Sure.
there was from the YouTube chat, Gregory Simpson asking what's the official name for a scene transition in which one scene ends with a question and the next scene answers it. It's called an ellipse. It's just a transition scene. So there isn't a name for that specific ellipse, but that is a kind of ellipse that you often see. I'm curious, which scene are you talking about? Because I was trying to think of an example of that, but I know what you mean in terms of like a general example.
Right.
Who is the bad guy? This is the bad guy. You know, we
Right.
see him in the next scene, but I'm just curious where you saw that in Rings of Power because that would be fun to play with.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
There's another question from Miss Manrique. Good concrete example. What about Maggie? Any scene comparisons? What's in that reference to? I'm not sure. Let me know.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I saw someone asking about the the kissing show. Do I believe the showrunners when they say that they did not anticipate that would be a big deal? I think I do. I mean, I on the one hand, I think I do. It's hard. I will admit that it's hard because in saying that I believe them there, that's not a compliment. Like I think there's some serious tone deafness in how that scene was developed. I also think actually, and Maggie and I have talked about this some, though we didn't get a chance to talk about it, you know, during the Rings and Realms episode. I think, Maggie, that the Galadriel Elrond kiss was a fascinating illustration of a principle you have said again and again and again, and that is how many people are involved in the process of making a film or making a show. If I was having a conversation after New England Moot on Saturday night in which we were talking about movies and great movies. We were talking about The Princess Bride, so we were talking about great movies. And you know, I was talking about what a, you know, just how in my opinion, The Princess Bride is one of the like perfect films. I mean, there's, you know, it is on my very, very short list of greatest films ever. And and another person was saying, it's like, it was just amazing how the cast came together and how just remarkably and perfectly cast that film was and everything. And I was like, yeah. And so when we were saying, in order to make a great film, like, there's so many people involved and everybody has to do their job, like, at the highest level. Right. And when that happens, when everyone involved just absolutely knocks it out of the park, you get this sublime experience. But it doesn't, it only takes a few people to mess up to make a bad movie. Right?
And there's not a formula for it, right? Like, I mean, I don't know this. We weren't in the production room, but like, I get the sense with something as big as an Amazon production that it's hard to have the kind of freedom to just be at your best, because you're always aware of what the reception's going to be. You're always aware of the other pressures that you have to kind of work under. There's different directors, there's different writers. I don't know this. This is just my like guess of what that room is like. Whereas Princess Bride had no real pressure on it. Right. They were all living in cheap flats in London and filming this thing on a whim. Like, it didn't have the same eyes on it that the most expensive production in the world had, with one of the most beloved texts and authors in the world. So there's a real different pressure on that kind of system. That doesn't mean you can't make great stuff. It just means it's a different starting point, I think. It is,
and there are different elements and factors involved for sure.
Yeah.
But the and it was back to the kiss and applying this to the kiss.
Oh, yeah.
Is that I think the Galadriel Elrond kiss is and the more, Maggie, the more you and I talked about this kind of, on couches off camera, during that whole week of prep and filming, the more convinced I got that that's a scene which could have been fine, could even have been great, potentially, even as it was. Like, I don't think, and you guys will see how this relates back to the original question of, do I believe them when they said they didn't think it was going to be a big deal? I will go as far as saying, I think it could have not been that big a deal. If certain of the production choices had been different. And I think it's all in post. I think that the choices that the actors made, and even the director, potentially, I think. Yeah. And though, again, I'm still very amateurish in trying to, in like discerning the difference between actor choices and like what's on the actor and what's on the director, whether good or bad, right, in a particular scene. That stuff is still fairly mysterious to me. But I think the whole thing and so Maggie, I was, and this you did in your segment, you were talking about the kind of mixed signals that the scene was given. But I think the mixed signals were coming from post-production. They were coming from,
I think so too. And
sound
like
editing
it should have been, or it could have been, I shouldn't say should, it could have been avoided had there been conversation about tone in the filming. That if it was very clear what the purpose of this was, because we read that article where Rob Aramayo was even saying, like, I didn't expect this. We had to have a big conversation about, like, what are they doing here? And, if we were all a little bit more clear in that shooting what everybody's point was and how everybody felt about it, it probably would have been a little bit easier in post to make that more clear. So you don't know where the mixed signal starts from, but I think it was pretty clear after a bunch of analysis there were a lot of mixed signals. Yeah. And it wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was going to be. Like, we thought the reaction was going to be
worse.
Huge.
Yeah.
And it was really big. There was a lot of questions. People really wanted to talk about it. But
not as much as we thought. Yeah.
But it wasn't like sink the ship, we're done. Yeah. It was just like, hey, that was real interesting. Can we talk about it? I do hope at some point they release the video that Ben took of the two of us watching it for the first time, though, because he knew it was coming. Ben had already seen it, and
I busted out laughing. Busted out laughing. With the kind of my react whenever I see something like that, the first time watching The Rings of Power through, my reaction my reaction as fan is secondary. My first reaction is always like thinking about the conversations I'm gonna have to have about this. Yeah, that is always. And so I was just like, oh my goodness, like this is
And I think I went the other way. I go for my reaction first, which was just what? And then
yeah,
I was actually super lucky though because we had Jordan Rennell's working with us on this show who does the soundscape. We had him on an episode of Other Minds and Hands a couple months ago. He's absolutely brilliant and just so fun to work through this stuff with. So I messaged him, I don't know, 10 or 11 at night, just being like, do you have time? I need to talk through this. And he was really helpful to kind of talk about musical cues and things like that
yeah.
and the different things that we were hearing. And that's what made it into my analysis of that bit
Yeah,
of
no,
just
and I think you guys are exactly right. I mean, it's the swell of the music that made it.
and it was the orchestral arrangement. Like, he
Yep.
pointed out if it had been like an uncertain single stringed instrument, it would have been very different than a single horn or a single oboe that has a really pure sound.
Right.
It was the fact that it was a whole orchestral arrangement that you're like, oh, that's a swelling of Galadriel's theme. So yeah, it was just a mixed signal to me,
It was.
especially with the look on her face. Like the look on her face didn't match the music that we had or the intent that we think we got from Rob, which was to hand over the brooch. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, mixed signals. Anyway, here we are again.
Here we are again. But no, so I mean, I the thing that convinces me that they didn't expect it to be such a big deal was the conversations of, not only conversations that like the conversation with Rob Arameo. Kirsten Cairns was talking. She had a long discussion with Sam Hazeldine, who played Adar, and she was talking about what he said about that scene. And he also was like, there, like all of the actors involved in the process were like clear on the fact that there was no romance going on here and comfortable with the way that was being played in that context and shooting for something quite different, in fact, in the scene as a whole, from the perspective of all of the different characters involved. So I think that it has largely to do with some post-production elements, especially the soundtrack, that really just changes the whole context of the thing and created. Now, again, would Tolkien fans, would book fans have been, still kind of creeped out about the whole kissing your mother-in-law thing? Probably there would still have been people who wouldn't have liked it under any circumstances.
Yeah.
But the only real problem that comes in there is if you see this and you have this sudden conviction, oh my goodness, they're introducing a romantic plot line between Elrond and Galadriel. Like, that's the problem. That's where that scene becomes a problem. And many of the people involved in that process believed thought it clear that they were avoiding that issue. Anyway, that's, it's certainly, so yeah, I do believe them when they said that, like that scene as they had conceived it and planned it, they did not think there was going to be a big problem with it. Does that mean I think they're right about that? Like, no, I don't think that that's right about that. And let me just say, this is actually one of those examples that I was talking about when I was saying, like things that I've learned from, from Other Minds and Hands, right? That's a moment where what is at conflict there fundamentally, I think, is our own imaginative vision of how particular characters or how particular, like, elves in general and those characters in particular might act under those circumstances. And when
It's like cultural,
yeah,
it's like cultural mores, right? I
right.
mean, it's expectations not being met, but you've built the world. I thought I understood the rules, and
Yeah.
now I'm confused.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, So anyway, right. But like whenever the simple issue of my own concept of what elves are like and how elves would act, and my specific concepts of who Elrond is and how he would act, and who Galadriel is and how she would act. All of those things inform our reactions to scenes like that, or, many other scenes. And the way in which talking about this as we have on Other Minds and Hands has really helped me to kind of distance myself a little bit more from those reactions, to realize that like what is happening there is we have one person or one set of people's headcanon, right? Their vision for what this is and how this works, and the story within the story that they're telling. And then there's, my image. We all have that. We all have that picture in our heads of like what elves are like and how elves would act, what Galadriel and Elrond are like and how they would act. And, so that's always going to be an issue, and that's never going to be identical. And that's the kind of thing that I think that we have to, let that go. But anyway,
but also how important it was to just discuss it, right? Because I feel like it didn't make sense for any of us, and there was a certain sense of community to kind of recognize that, to talk about why maybe, and then leave it behind. Be like, that was a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I mean, so do I believe that? Yes. Do I get that? Yes. If they had asked me, had I been in the room, would I have strongly argued against it? 100%. 100%.
I might have had some opinions.
Yeah. 100%. Just had they asked me, I would have said like, no, this is going to create too many problems for me. It's not worth it. It's not, like, I mean, you guys know how I talk about this, right? I mean, I think that the simplest way to think about this is cost benefit, right? What do you gain versus what is the potential cost? And that is, I mean, I can't think of a single example, not one single example in the Rings of Power, which I think has a more skewed cost benefit equation than that moment. Could they gain are the things they were trying to achieve during that scene like interesting and valuable in some sense? Sure. Yeah. Like I don't object to any of the things they were trying to accomplish in that scene. But the risk of failure to achieve that because of these other factors, combined with just this sort of reaction that's going to be, you're asking a great deal when you're asking all Tolkien book fans just to set aside the future, right? Don't think about either Celeborn or Celebrian when you're watching this scene. That's hard. Yeah. It's just, it's possible, but it's a big ask. And I think, again, cost benefit, I think is pretty clear.
And the questions that are coming up here are all valid and absolutely things that we kind of talked as well. Like that could absolutely be a platonic kiss. We don't know the mores and the exchanges of the elves. Like that's possible. But again, what we think as viewers is appropriate, and then the swelling of that music just shows me that there's some sort of emotional lift happening there, that it just didn't resonate in the same way. So yeah, was that the best move they could have taken? There's probably other ways she could have gotten the brooch.
Yeah, I agree. No, there are other options. That could have been, it definitely could have been done differently. But yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, Eric, I see your question, if they're not asking us, who are they asking and why not us? I get it. And of course we all kind of feel that way, right? On some level, right?
Sometimes we're like, guys, but Eric, you also asked earlier, like, what is the showrunner's knowledge of the books? Like, I would say pretty close to Corey's.
It's intense. You guys, there's no question.
Repartee.
There is no question. Yes. When I'm talking with them, I am not, it's like any other Tolkien experts that I'm talking to. They know the books really well. The things that bother people are mostly, this is going to sound strange, But it's mostly a matter of taste. It's a matter of their vision, what they're willing to do in telling a particular story, in with the kinds of choices they're comfortable making, the kind of vision that they have for how they want the story to come out, how they want the world to come across. Fundamentally, and those are always going to be different. Like no filmmaker is going to be the same. And it's been so long. I know we were talking about this at New England Moot. We were having a conversation at dinner afterwards, and we were around this table, and there were like 2 of us who were 50 years old or older. And everybody else was like 30s, basically, around the table. So we had like most people who did not have any memory of Tolkien before the movies came out, but 2 of us who did, right? And it's amazing the difference in the relationship to the Peter Jackson films. Because the people who grew up with the Peter Jackson films as the normative, dominant, this is what Tolkien looks like. These are what these characters look like. These are sort of the story values. And many of them then read the books, and I was this close to saying learn better, but I see how the books are different from the films. But for those of us who are old enough to have had a full relationship with Tolkien prior to the movies coming out, we all went through this same problem. Like, so many people have contrasted it like, it's so jarring from Tolkien compared to the Peter Jackson films. It's because you bloody don't remember before the Peter Jackson films. Like, right. It's formed your narrative. I had the same problem. Peter Jackson's vision for Middle-earth is beautiful. The sets and the landscapes are marvelous, but even those are not perfect. Lord of the Rings Rohan is not Rohan from the books. It's not prairie. And I get it. There aren't prairies in New Zealand. Like, he can't help it. It's fine. I don't hold it against him. But like, anyway, there were so many things over the years that, it took me years to acclimatize myself and to become comfortable with the particular choices and the particular adaptation choices he was making. And so I have all kinds of sympathy for people who have the same struggles with the Rings of Power. What I'm here to remind people is it's the same thing. It's no different. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
And obviously I fall into that camp of like, I forget what is from the book and what is from the films because they wind together so easily in my head that it makes sense for them to kind of lean into that almost because they honestly, I feel like they are playing to both those camps. And I remember talking to one of the game designers for Lotro, and he was saying like, well, we don't mind if it reminds people of Jackson's Middle-earth.
Yeah.
Like, of course you don't mind, right. If it looked totally different, that would be really jarring. And that's a huge audience that you are risking alienating because it doesn't look like what they think. So you kind of have to navigate this space. So if it is a little bit different from what the expectation is, that's kind of the point, is to try to appeal to all. But that's where both start to get a little muddy. So when they do make a decision that doesn't make sense to any of us, you're like, seriously? Like, there were so many other ways we could have gone with this.
Right, exactly.
Penny Weasley, Harry Potter. There's so many things.
Right. Right. But those are the things that are always going to happen when what you're getting is an adaptation, which is the artistic vision of a particular team of people meeting the book and interacting with the book and not interacting with the book in the way that you would interact with the book. Right. It's complicated.
And I like the point I've lost it now, but, I do, Nameless Arcanum, I do also find it fundamentally anti-art for the showrunners to feel obligated to poll a group of Tolkien experts before they're allowed to write what they want to write. Absolutely. The number of adaptations we can talk about that took the source material that was good and turned it into an incredible film that was totally different. There's lots of that, So, like, you shouldn't have to be belabored by existing art in order to create your own art. But you better be aware of how it could be received. Yeah. And so you better try to mitigate that as best you can.
And I would say, like, I don't think what the Rings of Power needs is more cooks in that kitchen. Like,
no,
that wouldn't help.
More singular visions.
Yeah.
And I feel like they got that a little bit more with the directors this season, that there seemed to be a little bit more continuity with some of the creative decisions that I don't know if they had less directors, but like we saw a lot of info about Charlotte,
Yeah.
and you
Charlotte
started
directed most of the season 2.
and you really started to see that.
Yeah.
Some of the continuity of performance I thought was really lovely, and the visuals matched, and it was a little bit less jarring, and that could be because of season 2. It's just the way the arc went. It was hitting its line a little bit better, but I think a lot of that came down to consistency too.
Yeah. 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 So, anyway, I think that is one of the changes I think we can see from season 1 to season 2. Some of the different kind of production decisions, I think, in that way. But yeah, Bernardo, it's hard to tell because, of course, like I'm not like polling the whole internet, but Bernardo's asking, what do we think of the reaction of the internet to season 2 compared to season 1? Way more positive in general.
Yep.
I would say. I mean, I see far more people who have really enjoyed season 2. And I think for good reason. I think that there is much more, I think it's much more in season 2, that is, that works really, really well. And much of it continues to be really, really interesting. So, anyway, yes. And I agree, Joseph, just as you say, it sounds a little snarky, and I don't mean it to be just snarky, but when people say, Rings of Power is totally destroying Tolkien, I'm always like, actually, I'm pretty sure. I just checked. It didn't, right? Like it's all still there, right?
Yeah.
And it really is. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm forgetting now who I was talking to because we filmed 26 hours of content in 4 days, but I think it was Matt that I was having this conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, you can't mess it up. Here it is. I have the book. And I was like, Corey, and I say that all the time. We're like, if you want to go back to the pure thing, you can find the pure thing and you can have the story that you want. But the fact that one person gets to have a hand and try telling the story in this neat visual way with a big budget and a lot of resources, cool. Let's go.
Yeah, and I sympathize with the people who are like, I just feel bad because there are going to be so many people who will see the Rings of Power and that will be their whole view of Tolkien. And I'm like, yep, and that's just what I said 25 years ago.
Exactly.
Precisely the conversation we were having
and maybe
25
it'll
years
sit
ago.
with and I still feel with all of this kind of literature adaptation that, well, maybe that's the thing that will sit with them and make them pick up the book a decade after. Great,
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, and I will say that I have heard that more. Like I have actually seen and heard from people who are like, I now want to go and read the Silmarillion, and I've never read it before, but like the Rings of Power has made me want to go and read the Silmarillion. Great. Yeah. I think it's starting to kind of build that sort of traction, that sort of traction more. And that's cool. That's great. That's, and that was the answer. 20, okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit when I say 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 20 years ago when there was, when the films were finished coming out, I was a professor. Like I was already, they started coming out when I was still in grad school. By the time the films were done coming out, that was right around the time when I was hired as an assistant professor and started teaching Tolkien in classes and stuff. And, giving papers at Tolkien conferences and that kind of thing. So like among the Tolkien scholars and everybody who were kind of anxious about the films and like, what is going on here? And what is this going to do
protective of it.
to the world of Tolkien studies? And yeah, there were a whole lot of people, like there was a pretty high quotient of folks within the Tolkien scholarly community who are highly resistant to the films. I know some, who still have no truck with any of it. Verlin Flieger, famously. Don't ask Verlin Flieger about the Peter Jackson films. You won't like what you hear if you do. But in any case, there's the anxiety was this is going to make Tolkien readership and Tolkien scholarship harder, because again, they're going to be filtering it through, and we're going to be spending the rest of our lives differentiating between, no, that's book Aragorn, we're not talking about movie Aragorn. But the payoff, right? The ultimate counter to that, which clearly, in retrospect, 20 years later, I can say was a winning argument, right? The winning argument against that is, and yet many millions of people will read Tolkien who would not have read Tolkien. And even if there will be many who will go to their graves knowing nothing about Tolkien except what they saw in the films, and even thinking they know what the Lord of the Rings is all about only because they've seen the movies. Yes. Will that happen? Yes. Has that happened? Absolutely. That has happened. And yet, so many people, so many millions of people have read Tolkien and become Tolkien fans. And, I have lived to see an entire generation of Tolkien scholarship arise who have come out of that, right? Who discovered Tolkien through the movies.
And by different paths, I've talked about it before. It's what inspired me to look into film, because the special features were so good on the extended editions about filmmaking and just process and, production practices. So cool. So whatever avenue it is, like, you come in from the creation side of it, how nice that they made appendices just for me to be able to give into this. And I think what you're saying makes total sense of, like, the big picture of any content that comes out now. I mean, you could say the same thing about the internet. The internet's going to make all of this much more difficult because so many things are now available to us. It's going to muddy the waters, and so many people are talking. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But there's also going to be a ton more access to content we didn't have before.
Yes.
Because we have all these new platforms. So, like, we got to sift a lot more than we used to. But that's why it's fun for us to talk about this, because we can sift together.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all good. Oh, by the way, Joseph was mentioning my comment on Tolkien canon and all of the great discussion that has come from that. So Bernardo says, when do we have an episode of Rings and Realms on defining what canon is?
2 days?
Wednesday?
Thursday? I think Wednesday.
Soon.
I think
Wednesday, I think. Very soon. I've already recorded it. There's a bit I want to go back and there's a thing that I thought of in conversation with Ben that Ben suggested that I think I'm going to go back and record like another paragraph to put into it. But no, that's coming. I will make a confession, but don't tell anybody. This is super secret because this is publicly on the internet. I totally did that on purpose. I insisted that statement about there not really being any such thing as Tolkien canon because Tolkien's ideas were ever evolving. Prime Video very graciously gave me veto rights on that video. Like that, when I agreed to do that video with them, I'm like, as many of you can understand, I was a little bit uncertain about it. And I'm like, I'll talk about Gandalf with you, but I'm going to want to see the edit before it gets released. And I insisted on putting that sentence in there. And the reason I wanted to include that, the reason I wanted to make sure that that got included in the context of talking about Gandalf is I have been a little frustrated to see the ways in which the idea of Tolkien canon has been misunderstood. People are using that phrase, the Tolkien canon, all over the place, without, in my opinion, having any clear idea or without demonstrating any clear idea of what the word canon actually means, and what it means, therefore, and like what it implies when you assert that there is a Tolkien canon. And and also further, I've seen that really weaponized in a lot of like it. I've seen it weaponized in ways as if it's like a discussion ender, right? Like if you want to talk about, but like the Rings of Power is picking up this really interesting thing from, the from Morgoth's Ring or the peoples of Middle Earth. And, you know, somebody's like, oh, but that's not canon, so that doesn't count. And it's like, okay, so that's the conversation ender because it's not canon. Okay. And I was like, we can't, no, like my own personal investment is in seeing more open discussion. And, you know, I'm not trying to fight fights. I'm not trying to, you know, to come after anybody, but I have felt increasingly the need to kind of raise this issue because it wasn't something people were talking about. People were using the phrase, people were deploying it, but no one was talking about it. No one was actually thinking critically about this question of what is the Tolkien canon? How do we know? And what does that mean? And what does it imply? And I'm like that. And I was just feeling from a like professorial standpoint, watching these discussions happening, I'm like, there's a serious gap in these arguments, and this feels like an important teaching moment. So when Prime Video approached me to do the Gandalf video, I was like, well, that will get some attention. So why don't I raise it here? And then we can, and then I'm like, and then if I'm very lucky, it will be picked up by lots of hater YouTube sites. And then everybody will be talking about canon. And lo and behold,
look, it was.
It happened. So,
I mean, talk about like cost and benefit analysis. Like that was a good strike.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, and I didn't even talk to him about it. I didn't know he was doing it. But then I saw Matt on Nerd of the Rings release a video on canon, and I was like, yes, look, discussion on what canon is and what it means.
And then that's the big difference. And like, and I think Matt was talking about on his show about, you know, needing to define it and stuff. And that is like the issue, but that has such a contentious tone to it. But like, there isn't a singular definition for canon. So you have to be comfortable with that before you're willing to engage in a conversation. And people aren't willing to engage in a conversation, and they aren't willing to be comfortable with the fact that it's not a black and white issue.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's hard to have a conversation with anyone that's not willing to think about that.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it was, I mean, honestly, this is one of the things, academics, you know, like professors, we're not usually very useful, but there are some moments, right, where like academic training and going to graduate school and going through all of the process that we go through and everything like does train certain habits that are really useful for framing discussions. And I just felt like this was a moment where I'm like, okay, can I kind of wave a yellow flag, right, as an academic to say like, look, y'all, all of you guys keep using this phrase, Tolkien canon, and you're not thinking about it. You're not talking about it. You're absolutely taking that for granted. And this is the kind of thing that academics are trained for, right? That academics are trained to think like, okay, are you defining your terms carefully, right? When you're debating something, are you talking about the same thing? This is, of course, not something that internet commenters are trained to be rigorous in thinking about. Anyway, so I wanted to take the opportunity to kind of divert some of the attention to this issue itself. And I'm delighted to see that it has been done. Obviously, I've not been delighted to receive another round of, you know,
you're going to get more on this next video, but I think it's all about engaging in the conversation, which is what our whole aim is to do. And not to like bring out the haters, but just to provide some opportunity for some other thoughts, because there's not a lot of other thoughts out there. So
and the discussion of like the extent, you know, it doesn't mean that saying like, is there any such thing as a canon in Tolkien in any sense? And if so, in what sense and to what extent that matters? Like, that's a conversation. I think it's a really interesting conversation. We started, again, I'm referring back to recent conversations, but after New England, we were having this conversation too about, so it's not exactly a canon issue, but of course there is a distinction between the works published by Tolkien in his lifetime and the works not published by Tolkien in his lifetime, right? There's no question that those two things are identical, right? But the difference between them is not a canon and non-canon question, right? So instead, let's talk about that. Let's think about that.
And especially with Tolkien, because it's so interesting, the process he went through over decades.
Yes.
Like, it is the best case study for looking at how what people think the word canon is doesn't work. So,
Yeah.
it's a shame that it can't be more fun to talk about. And I think it's a good effort to try to make it more fun to talk about. So
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
see how that video is received. But
Exactly.
yeah, that's coming
Yeah.
out soon.
Yeah, I was put in mind of it. There was this one time in the middle of New England Moot, one of the presenters was talking about heresy and the Gnostics and Tolkien. It was a really interesting talk, and afterwards we were having a discussion about Tolkien's thought, and Ian, the presenter, said, I think that 1950s Tolkien would think that, but 1930s Tolkien would not. And I was just like, oh, what a breath of fresh air to have that conversation, like to have a conversation, with people who are willing to see, like, 1930s Tolkien and 1950s Tolkien are not even the same writer. Like, it's not, are any of us the same as we were 20 years ago? Like, if you had a conversation with yourself 20 years ago, would your views be entirely the same as they were back then? Like, come on. Anyway, and I know that, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, anyway, but of course with Tolkien, we have like the state of his thoughts in 1937, and then the state of his thoughts again in 1954, and that's interesting. Like, it's fascinating to see and to talk about, but then just the desire to treat Tolkien as if it were like one, his ideas and his writings and his thoughts were one totally unified thing. I think it's not only a hopelessly inaccurate way to look at Tolkien, but it's also missing a huge portion of the fun. I mean, and it is fun, but yeah.
And my only thought with that was it's slightly different, and we're not really talking about it now, but like problematic authors is kind of a similar ilk. That I was just reviewing the Lovecraft classes that Gabriel and I re-recorded for that, which are in Collaboratory now. And we did a bit on problematic authors. And Lovecraft was very problematic. He was quite racist and all sorts of things when he was 21, 22. And he never asked for forgiveness, but he kind of said, I don't think I was right back then towards the end of his days. And he died at 41. I mean, this is not a massive arc, it's 20 years. But just that, over 20 years, he realized maybe I was a bit smug and didn't quite make the right decisions. So being able to have a little bit of grace for somebody over their own human journey in terms of a creator.
Yeah.
But a totally different kind of grace for somebody who purposely did that. He's like, well, I'm going to continue to improve and discuss and think about my world and make it more believable and deeper and richer. Well, some of those things are going to negate the stuff that happened 30 years ago. So do I fix it, or do I just go, and keep going?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's super fun. It's super fun to think about.
Yeah. So anyway, my video talking about canon will be coming out. The one kind of Cliff Notes point from it, by the way, is to remember something which so many people don't think about. When you're talking about canon, in the sense in which everyone's using the word canon, when you're talking about canon, you are either asserting or attributing authority. Canon is all about authority. You can't. There's this. It's all about authority, and most of the people who talk about Tolkien canon believe that they're giving the authority to Tolkien. One of the things that I argue is that they're doing the opposite of that, in fact. So anyway, you'll hear what I have to say about that. We can talk about it more.
We can talk about it next time.
Yeah, if you want to kind of react to that or continue the discussion at all, we can bring that up again later on. Anyway, yeah. So hey, Dragoon on YouTube introduces himself as a hater. Hey, appreciate the honesty. No, I'm certainly not waving away the problems with the show with a hand wave. As I say, if you're interested, I'm going to be releasing what'll probably be about a 12, 13-minute video on canon and what exactly I'm talking about canon and why I think it's so important. If you have respect for Tolkien, you should definitely not be... hand-waving is actually precisely how I would describe the way that the phrase Tolkien canon is used in order to dismiss most of the things that Tolkien cared most about, in fact, in his own writing. So anyway, that's... Well, as I say, I'll be releasing a video on that, so you can watch the Rings and Realms channel is where that will be posted first. So I encourage you to look at that. Oh, hey, Ray Burns is here. Hi, Ray. Haven't seen you around in a while. Anyway, sorry, just seeing an audience member that I haven't seen in a while. Just wanted to say hi. Cool. So there was a lot of just so many moments in the analysis of season 2 and in the Rings and Realms process, which have been really rewarding this time. I mean, sitting down and doing the analysis, seeing the analysis, doing the analysis, just really, it's so... And I told Patrick this when I saw him in New York at the finale screening, that the thing about Rings of Power is like, it's, when I watch it the first time, I'm like, okay, that was interesting. And then when I watch it the second time, I'm always like, okay, actually, that was pretty good. Like there's a lot of interest in there. And then when I spend 8 hours analyzing it, I'm like, that was brilliant. In fact, right.
And this is the point we kept coming back to, but it takes 8 hours.
It takes 8 hours, right? It's such a peculiar show in that way.
But the point we kept coming back to with the show, though, is like, it was so much fun. Like Rings and Realms, I mean. Yeah. And, you know, I was staying with my parents while I was in New Hampshire, and I would go back, and I was like, this is like High School Musical Tech Week, where like we're all just in on this project. Everybody is sleep deprived, living on caffeine, like community is building, and it doesn't even matter if we like the show or not, because what we're doing is analysis. Like we're just working through it, and we're trying to figure things out. It's like the best puzzle with some really interesting minds with different ways of looking at things. Or an escape room. I'm not sure which metaphor works best with it, but it was just so much fun that by the end of every night, I was just like, I can't believe we get to do this. It's awesome.
It is true that even in moments when even when we were having moments of frustration with the show, and there were times, The Kiss was a big example. I was grumpy for a day or so about The Kiss, not even just because of the thing, but because I was like, why do you have to make my life hard like this, guys? Seriously.
Well, and there was a question earlier on, like, were you guys annoyed at things that weren't answered? Oh my God, the list is so long of things we were annoyed by. So, like, I don't want you to think it's all like roses and stuff. It's like, yeah, there's loads of stuff that wasn't answered that we're wondering about and questioning. But we were just talking about what was in front of us and what we could talk about and what we could shed some light on. And that part took hours. To just think about. Yeah,
that's the thing. And again, this is also, it's part of the academic thing, right? Like, I mean, doing analysis, really digging into, it makes me think, I think the example you were giving, Maggie, of Lovecraft is a really good example, right? Like you can prepare and teach a course on Lovecraft and analyze his work. And that doesn't mean you have to love everything he wrote or admire him as a person even, right? Like are there problematic things? Yeah. Like, is there racism in Lovecraft? Oh yeah. Like there's a lot of stuff going on there. There are other issues one could have with him or with other authors, but that doesn't mean it isn't interesting to discuss. It isn't interesting to analyze. Yeah. When you're stepping back, this is one of the ways for me in which the idea of not really Barth's death of the author concept, but the separation between art and artist, right? Because a lot of, and this is one of the reasons, by the way, actually, I feel like we should do a follow-up discussion of this. I had a bunch of interesting of those discussions that you missed that went until 4 a.m. A couple of them that I was having with Ben were about the critfic question.
Yeah, make notes, make outlines. Let's do it.
Yeah, because I would love to talk about critfic a little bit more, because I was in a lot of those discussions, I was thinking that through a little bit more. What does this mean about the relationship between the author and the text and everything? But you'll notice how most people, when they talk about the Rings of Power, they're talking about people. They're talking about the showrunners. They're talking about, like, I can't believe they did this. Like they, right? The first step in Rings and Realms is to be like, it's not about them. It's about it. It's about the show.
And you'll notice how much we like to talk about the showrunners. Like, it's just, it's really interesting to know the background. I like to know what the directors are into. I like to know what the creative process is. But what we're looking at is the show. I can't think of an instance where we referenced an interview or an article or anything. Like, we're not looking at the peripheral stuff initially. We're just looking at what's in front of us.
Yeah.
And what's that showing us.
Yeah. Again, I keep bringing up the kiss scene just because we talked about it already. So just using that as an illustration is simpler. There's a big difference between looking at, like, between the questions, what were they thinking when they decided to do that, and the question, what is going on in this scene, and how, what are the cues that we're getting, right? The analysis that Maggie was describing, that she and Jordan were doing of the scene, which was, I was very convinced by their analysis there. I believe, like, so again, in an objective, and as objective as you can get, you always try to be as objective as you can in an analysis of the product, not thinking about what are they doing, guessing, what are they trying to do, what are they hoping for, what are their motivations, any of that, all that stuff is speculation, right? But to focus on what is there. Like, we have been presented with this work of art, right? This work of cinematic art. What is it doing? What is the effect of the choices that have been made there, right? And then, of course, like, we can go on, as we were, to have the discussion, like, given what we see in this scene, how might they have chosen differently? Like, whatever. It's not that those things aren't interesting to discuss. But that fundamental separation between, we're discussing this work of art versus we're interacting with the people. And it's a I want to call it even a piece of slippage, like intellectual slippage that people make all the time. Like, when you're reading a book and you think you're interacting with the author, you're not interacting with the author. You're interacting with the book, right? The author might interact with the book quite differently, and you don't even know. Right. And this is one of the reasons why I don't generally care that much what authors say about their books, because it's not theirs anymore. They've published it. It's now standing on its own, and now we get to interact with it. And I have as much right to like look at it and tell you what it is saying than the author does. And if the author comes in and says, no, the book is saying something quite different, if what the author says contradicts with what I see in the text, I will say that. And I've said that with Tolkien sometimes, but that doesn't come up with Tolkien as much because his own approach to his own written text fell into that pattern. He very, very rarely tried to just simply assert authority and say, like, no, that's not what I meant. He was talking about, even when he was objecting to it being read as an allegory of World War II, his argument was, that's a crappy reading of this text. I can tell you that was certainly not my intention. So, like, spoiler, that wasn't what I was going for. But then, of course, you'll remember how even within the preface in which he talked about that, the famous moment where he talks about what he then immediately does is go on to say, if you think it through, it would be a horrible allegory, right? If it were an allegory, it wouldn't go like this, it would go like that. Since it doesn't go like that, it's obviously not an allegory of that story, so knock it off, right? Anyway.
I'm gonna quickly answer Meow and Deeds.
Yeah.
She was asking about accents, pronunciation, adaptation. Basically, the question is, can we do an episode on this? Yes, because I think we're gonna look to get Leith back on.
Yeah, I would love to talk
language.
to Leith about that.
And there's a whole
coach.
section that you and James answered. I think it was episode 8, wasn't it? So you guys haven't seen it yet. the Fëanorian Lisp, or did that happen?
Oh no, that was earlier.
No,
we talked
was
the Fëanorian Lisp one. Yeah, we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, so Meow Indeed, there is an answer to that specific one where James and Corey talk about the Fëanorian Lisp. I forget what episode that was.
Yeah.
But yes, Leith is definitely somebody we want to bring on because we were so impressed with. We had like an hour-long conversation with her, and it just flew because, like everybody else in the show, she's done her homework and just had so much interesting stuff to consider when developing not just the languages of each area, but the dialects and the lisps and the accents of each character within those regions. So based on where they grew up, based on where they were educated, where they'd spent the last 5 to 10 years, like there was so much feeding into what created that character's sound.
Right.
That I think would be lovely to bring her in for season 2 and talk about this a little bit more because we have more info now.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. She is definitely on our list of people that we're hoping to continue bringing in. It's a longish list. So is Charlotte Brandstrom, by the way, the director of most of the episodes. I got to talk to her briefly in New York also, and invited her. So we're gonna try to get that on. But
and reschedule Owen and so many others, guys. We're working at them all.
Yeah. No, it's that's gonna be a lot of fun. So okay, we're coming to the end of our time.
That was quick.
It was quick. Oh, hang on. I want to respond to one of the things. So, Dragoon 110, our hater, was saying, where was it? I've lost it. Oh, there it is. If you have to watch something 7 times in a row for it to make sense, then that's a problem. No, well, it's for some people, sure. Like for people who aren't willing to watch it 7 times, yeah, totally. It makes me very understanding of people who watch it once and say I wasn't gripped by it. I'm like, I can understand that, right? Sure. Yeah.
And I concur with you in terms of production standpoint. Like if I were Amazon looking at numbers and figures and, business side of things, this is a problem. Like
sure.
You want this to be popular and well received and widespread understanding. And there's a little bit of that, but there's not the immediacy that there is with some other fantasy series because this does ask more of you.
Right.
So yeah, it's a problem in one respect. It's not a problem at all in another respect.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's I would say it's not my problem, right? And
once again, we answer the question of was this show made for Corey? Yes, it might have been. Yes,
it kind of was. I mean, like I said, if I had to choose between a show which is really gripping, but then every time you rewatch it, it's a little bit less interesting. I mean, I think we've all had that experience before, right? Where you're watching like, oh, that was really good. And then you watch it again, you're like, oh, it was less. I mean, that happens sometimes when there's just this sort of superficial appeal. If I had to choose between that and one which I got to watch 2 or 3 times each episode in order to really process it and before it really all starts clicking, I'm choosing the second one every single time. Like that's
Anyone shocked? Anyone?
Right now, this is so yeah. Like it is almost eerie how much their sensibilities are similar to mine. Not in every way. It's not like all of their artistic choices and all of the things are the things I would have done. They're not. Yeah. I wouldn't have done the kiss. But at the same time, I like many of our. I don't know. I get the vague impression that I don't know. They're interested in many of the same things that I am, and our minds think similar ways because I really enjoy following the tracks, basically.
Which is why you have so much fun talking to them, and they have so much fun talking to you. It's kind of a small club that can have this. Yes. Like, let's bring in Steve Colbert, and we'll really have a party.
Exactly. It was funny. One little behind the scenes thing. When we recorded our interview with the showrunners, it was supposed to be relatively short because they had a short time window and they kept extending it. They were like, we have another 10 minutes. Do you guys have another 10 minutes? We're like, yeah, let's keep going. And so they kept doing that until finally the director of marketing, who was silently on the Zoom call as well, she turns on her webcam, and as soon as she turned on her webcam, Patrick's we're in trouble. We have to go now. Apparently we're being told we're supposed to be somewhere else. Yeah.
I think we were originally 30 minutes, but setup took a few minutes. And so we're like, well, we have 26 minutes left. We're like, no, we'll give you a full 30. We get to 30, and they're like, can you go for another like 20 or 30 more?
Right. Yeah, so we ended up going about an hour, and then finally, like, the marketing people were like, "No, we really have to stop." But I have no idea how long the conversation with them would have gone on if they hadn't had
I think
the
quite
plug
some
pulled.
time.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Anyway, okay, so we will, and I will say, it is the thing that has been, for me personally, most delightful about the Rings of Power is the number of people involved in the process with whom I've been fortunate to have delightful Tolkien conversations with.
When you guys saw it with Ben Walker on that
Yeah.
interview, I mean, the first time we met him was on that Twitter after show where we were given 15-minute windows to talk, and we went
Right.
40 with him. And
Yes.
the depth that he blew us away with was just incredible. So,
Yeah.
and he was saying, I don't get to do this. So being able to bring the work that they put into developing their craft, and again, we're looking at this as a piece of art. They are artists and they're putting this time and effort into it. So being able to have the space where they're able to go to that level and talk about it that deeply, happy to provide it, folks. Happy.
Yeah, exactly.
It was great. Yeah.
Exactly. No, it's been really cool. So those are the kinds of conversations. That's why we're hoping to continue those conversations through Rings and Realms
For sure.
over the course of the next few months or whatever happens. So, all right.
So I think we're on next week. I'm in Scotland, but I should be able to do it.
And I should be home from, unless something disastrous occurs on the travel front, coming home from Missouri. I should be fine. I'm going to be in Kansas City for Middlemouth this coming weekend, but I should be back in time to do that. So we're planning to go next week. And next week, do you want a sneak preview of what we want to talk about next week?
Yes,
We want to
please
talk
do.
about this. I want to talk about the War of the Rohirrim. So they released this. I'm showing, for those of you who aren't looking at it, I'm showing the long horizontal tapestry image that they released, promotional image they released for the War of the Rohirrim at New York Comic Con this past
It looks
weekend.
like back when they did like special feature DVDs, it looks like when you would take it out of the case and unfold it. Like
Yes.
it's just beautiful.
Yeah,
We want to go through that.
They did these kinds of images for the Hobbit movies also, and I loved looking through them. I love the kind of narrative flow, and it's like this is like a trailer in one image, right?
Yep.
So anyway, so Maggie and I we'll look at this and kind of do some more of the Rohirrim discussion, do some analysis of what we're being. As in a trailer, we're looking at what was being presented, which is not the same thing as what the movie itself is going to be necessarily. And I think presumably the same here. Anyway, so that's one of the things we hope to talk about next time. And we look forward to more War of the Rohirrim discussion next time. And soon we'll be talking about we should have a little bit more information for you on our plans for, not immediately, but soon we'll have some more information on Rings and Realms War of the Rohirrim plans. So all right, thanks everybody.
Nice to see you guys again.
Yep.
Take care.
Good to be back. See you guys again next week. Bye now.